you can start.
Hello, everybody. My name is Juliana Gonçalves, and I would like to welcome you today to the second session of the Spatial Justice in Practice Symposium. Yesterday, we had a very fruitful day of presentations and discussions, and we hope to keep it going today as well. This event is organized by the Center for the Just City at the TU Delft in the context of the Horizon Europe Up 2030 project. I am here today with my colleagues Caroline Newton, Roberto Rocco, Hugo Lopez, Andres Maglione, Russell Smith, Shakiar Sarabi, Marte Zingelengeberg, and Bob Knuster. And we are honored to have you here today. We look forward to a session of stimulating dialogue and intellectual discovery. Today we have the most special keynote speaker that we could bring, our colleague Caroline Newton. She's gonna talk about, or the title of her note is Raw's Imagination and Design, Exploring the Spatial Imperative in Upholding Justice. Caroline, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julianne. Just a brief comment before I start. I took this opportunity for the keynote to explore a bit how and if I can connect some political ideas, some political theory with design. And sort of in the symposium, we have been talking a lot about questions of spatial justice, and so I'll try to see how I can deepen some of these ideas, and I'll share my screen. Here. Okay. Do you see the full screen?
Yes, we see the full screen.
Okay, thanks. So, as I said in the symposium the past day, we've talked and discussed questions of spatial justice, and more specifically, we've tried to understand how we can benchmark spatial justice and how we can then translate these ideas into practice and policy. And in the presentation today, I just want to go back to the fundamentals on which this discussion is built. And the first crucial fundament is justice. So what is justice? How can we define it? And for that, I will go back to the ideas of John Rawls. To me, it's not sort of surprising to connect back to this political work, because to me, design is political, and I hope that I can kind of come back to that at the end. And that brings me to the second fundament, which is imagination and linked to design. Because if we think about the idea of a just city, that is also something that we're kind of imagining and thinking about. So it's another important aspect. And I'll try to tie two together through another of Rawls' concepts, the veil of ignorance. And so why do I think this is important? Because what we witness today is actually some dramatic political shifts, from the rise of figures like Javier Milei in Argentina to Geert Wilders very recently in the Netherlands. On the other hand, we see that some other political leaders from the same kind of, they have the same similar ideas, like Bolsonaro in Brazil or Duda in Poland. They luckily they are no longer in power, but the effect that they has a huge impact on the countries, and it has often challenged and damaged the democratic fabric. So the rise and fall of these kind of leaders highlights a sort of global discontent with established political norms, but also the vulnerability of our democratic systems. For me, a very painful example is the LGBTQ free zones in Poland. And there you already see that you cannot think about space without politics, or politics without space. I could have also used the example of South Africa, where we see that even like 3 decades after the end of apartheid, the apartheid's ideologies, spatial translation is still present today, or still makes some changes more difficult today. So that means that I ask myself the question, can we align urban planning and design with the Rawlsian principle of justice? And if so, can it become a powerful tool to reinforce the ideals of democracy? So can we design shared spaces that embody inclusivity, accessibility, and equality, so that we can create physical environments that not only reflect, but also kind of bolster the democratic process? And I hope that this intersection of urban design and political theory offers a unique opportunity to respond to some current global challenges, like some of the ones I already kind of pointed to. So then the question is, what is justice? And as I already said, for that I wanted to go back to the work of John Rawls, A Theory of Justice, published in 1971. And it's kind of 1971, the late 60s have just passed, so it was already also a period marked by social and political unrest, but also with a thirst for change. So the book sort of arrived maybe as a response to these turbulent times, but it's also a very important transformative text that has reshaped the terrain of political thought. It was crucial to thinking about ethical and moral philosophy, and it has set the stage for many subsequent publications and evolutions or ideas that are deeply rooted in these principles of justice. In the book, Rawls presents not only a set of principles, but also a method that I think is really, really valuable for us if we work in design and urban planning. And I will come to that method later. So when Rawls talks about these principles of justice, what is it that he's actually talking about? And on the slide, I've put the exact phrasing in the book, but the principles explain that in a just society, all citizens should have the widest possible set of basic freedoms at their disposal. And that is so because that allows them to shape their own lives. So it means that the freedom of speech, freedom of political organization, freedom of religion. So all of the citizens should have the widest possible set of these basic freedoms to their disposal. Second principle is kind of a double principle, and it says that jobs and positions from which people benefit should be distributed under a regime of equal opportunity. So it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, whether you have a different skin color or whatever other aspect, all of these things should not discriminate the opportunities that you have. And then very interestingly, the second sort of part is he stresses there that social economic inequality is allowed on one condition, and the condition is that such inequality benefits the least advantaged in society. And this is often called kind of difference principle. And the difference principle seeks to address the inequalities that comes from one's initial position in society. For Rawls, this starting position is actually seen as arbitrary and undeserved. So he acknowledges that people are born into different circumstances and with varied natural endowments, which are beyond their control. And to redress these inequalities, Rawls suggests that societies should be structured in a way that these inherent disparities work to the benefit of the least advantaged. An example would be education. How do we allocate resources for education? Maybe we can put more resources in early years of schooling for those who are kind of less endowed intellectually, and so on. So there are different ways of thinking of how you can structurally make sure that people's chances to build this good life are sort of so it is about, I have a slide about it. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of their starting point, has the opportunity to improve their situation and build a good life and contribute meaningful to society. And I think this kind of allowing people to build a good life is really crucial. So in essence, it's not about his ideas. It's not about creating a homogeneous society where all differences are eliminated, but about designing a social structure where the differences are used to uplift the least advantaged, thereby fostering a more just and equitable society. And when we take space into account, if you remember, Edward Soja explains the spatiality of justice and injustice. And he explains that where one borns and lives clearly also has an impact on the opportunities that determine your life prospect. So it's not only about how healthy you are, or like the example of education, with what kind of intellect you were born, but also the place where you are born and the opportunities that are embedded in that space. So if we think about that, then what does that mean for spatial planning? Very often, and Moroni, who was yesterday also presenting at our conference, also shows that in planning, then very quickly the difference principle is applied to individual kind of urban policies and plans. We see that a certain area, a neighborhood in a city, there is an issue. Okay, let's make a plan and intervene and redevelop. And we've heard the word redevelopment a lot yesterday. But we have to tread carefully. What you see here is an example of the Kolenkiet area in Amsterdam, where there has been projects of redevelopment, which I think, although it was tried not to trigger gentrification, I do think that gentrification and the pushing out of vulnerable groups did happen. So what I'm trying to say is it's not a plea to not invest in places that need investment or change, but it's really pointing to do that in a more structural way rather than ad hoc seeing, okay, this is a we have some challenges, let's change that area. No, let's think of a system of how to make the city, and with all its different places, interesting places to live. In a sense, Rawls pays a lot of attention to what we have called in our approach the procedural aspect of spatial justice, and he emphasizes the importance of designing social systems in a way that they compensate for the arbitrary disadvantages that of people's starting position. Because as I already explained, he acknowledges that people are born into different circumstances and with varying abilities. So the principle of redress, therefore, calls for recognizing, and that brings us to the recognition aspect of justice, calls for recognizing these differences and compensating for them to create a more equitable society. In spatial terms, this means acknowledging the diverse needs and identities of urban populations and designing spaces that are not just physically accessible, but also culturally inclusive and responsive to the varied histories and the experience of the residents. It is about recognizing and valuing the unique contributions of all community members and reflecting that in the physical makeup of the city. I'm just looking at the time, so I think I already talked a bit on this distributive, so I'm going to jump actually and talk about, okay, then what does design and what does imagination, when does that come in and why is it important? And that is when the idea of the original position is interesting. It's a conceptual standpoint that Rawls proposes, and it's kind of, it serves as a fair and impartial vantage point, essential for deliberating on foundational principles of justice. So what he proposes is that when we think of this society, that we do it behind a veil of ignorance. And Roberto, I see that it's already 20 past, so I'm really going to jump through the presentation and skip quite a bit.
Caroline, I think we started 5 minutes later, so please. think.
Yeah, okay, but I'll immediately jump to this idea of the veil of ignorance, because I think it becomes a very useful tool, an interesting tool for designers as well. So the concept is really central to his theory of justice, and it serves as a crucial tool in evaluating the fairness, also a concept that we discussed quite a lot yesterday, of societal structures. And the veil of ignorance actually asks us to imagine ourselves in an original position, behind a veil where we are unaware of our own particular talents, our social status, or wealth, or personal biases. And from this point, devoid of all knowledge of our individual circumstances or positions in society, we are tasked with designing the rules and structures that govern our worlds. So it's an exercise that compels us to consider policies and systems that are fair and just for everyone, as we do not know where we might end up in the social hierarchy. It's really a tool that fosters impartiality and objectivity. So it helps us to think about the principles that we think are crucial when we think of a future society, but also, I think, important for designers when we design. Yesterday, Alex showed a picture of this slum redevelopment in Salvador that was done and designed by a famous architect from Rio de Janeiro. And he explained that this architect didn't really understand the everyday life of local residents. So the design of the house didn't provide for those needs. So for me, it's a bit a call to designers to try to understand these different points, these different starting positions that people have in their life when we design, when we come up with ideas, plans, and proposals. And I think that we can do that because we are maybe not political theorists or we are not sociologists, but something that we do have as designers is that we are able to imagine, we are able to make visions, visualizations, drawings. These are examples from a thought experiment for the Flemish coast. How will it develop in the future? So not only can we kind of imagine or show how these possible futures look like, and then also be very explicit about the principles they're built on, we can also think of the strategic pathways that we need to take in order to make these a reality, or sort of move closer to them. And with that, I want to conclude that the interplay between the political nature of design and architecture and the principles of justice, as I've tried to explain as they are outlined by Rawls, offer a profound inspiration, I think, for contemporary urban planning and design. And very importantly, I want to really stress that again, his insights are really stressing the systemic structures. It's not about just here and there one thing, it's really a systemic question. And the focus on designing for groups of needs of people and so on. So in that sense, design is really about politics, and they are not neutral acts. So when we want to when we want to design, when we want to plan, it's really important to keep that in the back of our minds. And I think I will end with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
Maybe we have time for one or two questions from the audience.
Can I ask one, Roberto?
Yes.
Caroline, the veil of ignorance?
Yes.
Do you think if people understand that it helps, or what's the step to kind of dismantle that?
I think for designers and planners, people who are really shaping our physical spaces, I think it's an interesting tool or an image to help them understand that you can not just design like you've always design. When we learn in architecture school, when we learn design, we too often we start from our own experience. If I design like this is what people will do, this is what will happen. And it's not the case. And you can say that like 1,000 times, but I think that this kind of experiment, I can imagine that if you translate it to education, you could really put students together or even practitioners later on in their careers, trying to be very explicit in explaining, look, we are going to design this city. What are the basic principles on which we will design it? And now you are this architect and now you are this planner maybe, but you don't know if we move through this kind of stage where you will end up. Maybe you will not be a planner anymore. Maybe you will be, I don't know, a painter, or you will be an artist, or you will be someone working in healthcare. Then how has what you have designed kind of give people opportunities to have a good life? And I like kind of the phrasing of building a good life, because that is something that everybody can define for themselves. What is a good life for me might not be a good life for someone else.
And if I may, I think the veil of ignorance addresses this fundamental question of what is it to design for people who are very different from you, completely different even, and our duty to think of human beings at a more fundamental level, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Caroline. I don't know if Juliana would like to say something.
There is a question on the chat. Should I quickly read it? The question is from Dennis. I don't know if you want to ask the question yourself.
Yeah, hi, great presentation. I was wondering, especially in Netherlands, I'm not sure how it's going there, but is there any way to foster community engagement through policies? Because I think in the design process, communities should also have a say, and I'm not sure if you have any ideas or how can we make this community engagement stronger in the design phase.
Thank you for the question. I think how you phrase it, and also in the chat when you say, could we shape policies to foster community involvement? I think that is a quite nice how you state that, because I think that is maybe what is needed more. Indeed, a structural approach to how to include the voices of communities in design and planning. It links more to what Rose is also saying about this kind of more structural ideas when we shape our cities. So I do think it's important to, of course, to have this kind of participatory approaches, but then really think like how you phrase it. How do you put the policy or a system in place that does it in a structural manner, not just like what happens now too often. Okay, and the area is going to be redeveloped. There's a developer, and oh yes, participation. We still need to do that. Let's hire a little hall, and we have an evening, and we ask people what they think of the plan, and they can put some post-its, and that's it. That's I think not a structural solution to really include people's voices in planning and policy. But we should really take a step back and see how it can be more structural and more institutionalized, probably. I don't know if that answers your question.
All right. I think we will have more time at the end to discuss. So I propose that we go straight away to our breakout rooms. We know that Zoom is very tricky and things generally don't go right, but we will try. I will now open 4 breakout rooms. You should know to what breakout room you have to subscribe, okay, or to get into. See you on the other side. See you. Is it working? Can you see the breakout rooms? Okay.